Learning what is happening on your paper and the timing of watercolor is what makes all the difference. I'm going to talk through what is going on the paper through every phase of painting the sky. Grab a seat, get comfortable, get that cup of tea, whatever you need to sit here and learn about watercolor timing. That's what we're covering today, so let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm doing here first is I'm laying in the lightest values of the clouds. I've used a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of lavender. And like I always do, I've pre-wet the paper, the front and the back, and I've laid it on my surface. Now, the paper's wet. I'm adding in more water. I'm building up the strength of the sky as I go. Starting with a series of light washes. And it's hard to see on camera, but there are some very subtle value changes that are happening here that I'm starting to build up. So the first thing I do is I lay in the light values of the clouds. I lay in a light warm tone, and that is some raw sienna with a touch of lavender, and then I build up the strength from there. That, what I've already laid down, is the brightest part of the sky. Nothing else is going to be brighter. And as I paint around these clouds, the brightness will become evident as I paint a rich blue sky around these clouds. So the paper is wet, and I've laid in some tone for the clouds. I'm not just leaving them the white of the paper. And now I'm able to get these nice, soft, lost edges. I've added a little bit more paint to my brush, and I'll be using more and more paint throughout this process. So what I'm doing here is laying in some soft value for little changes in clouds. So these clouds are soft shapes with little changes in the value, which means there's some darker areas and some lighter areas. And I'm laying all that in now. So I'm painting the clouds, and then we'll go back in and paint the blue of the sky while the paper is still damp. You'll notice here that I have a stronger mixture of raw sienna and lavender, and I'm laying that up here. These parts of the clouds that are gray, the bottom sides of these clouds, I'm using a combination of raw sienna, lavender, a little bit of neutral tint if I really want to make it darker. And then the areas where there's some cooler shadows in the clouds, I'll mix in a little bit of cobalt blue. And so having a little bit of nuance, even in the gray underside of the clouds, a little bit of cooler areas with some cobalt blue, a little bit of areas that are more warm with more raw sienna. And so this whole first part of painting the sky is getting in these soft little value changes, little transitions in color, painting all the clouds first. And then when this sets in a little bit, I will paint the blue of the sky. And I think you'll be surprised about how little blue there actually is in this sky because there are so many clouds. Just a few little hints of blue will really bring that together. So the paper is still damp. It's damp from the top all the way to the bottom. And when I'm painting a sky that takes a lot of attention, I'll paint down to the horizon line, and I'll just kind of leave that there. So the ground and everything else I'm going to worry about once I'm finished with the sky. So I'm still using my big brush, and I've put a mixture of cerulean and cobalt blue. And now I'm going to where I created these this cloud here and painting right up to it, letting those colors merge on the paper. It's one of the most beautiful parts about watercolor, and it's a great part about this technique. So I want you to notice what's happening here. I dampened the whole paper, but because things have set for a while, I am starting to get a hard edge right here. And it's not a real hard edge, but it's what I call malleable. It's not just set, the paper is damp, but it's dry enough where I'm getting a little bit more control. This part of right here is going to be the brightest cloud in the painting. So I'm going to come back to this later after I lay in some blue in other areas and get my richest and strongest blue to paint right here when the paper has set just a little bit longer. Another thing I wanted to mention is when I was dampening my paper, you might not be able to tell this on camera, but I wasn't just getting it soaked. I was just dampening it. So I had a sponge. It wasn't sopping wet. It was just a little wet, and I was evenly wetting down the back and evenly wetting down the front. I don't need to soak this under the sink. I don't need to soak my paper in the sink. I don't need to put it in the bathtub, any of that. I'm just simply dampening the front and the back, and that is great for two reasons. One, it stays wet longer, so I have time to work into this while things are damp. And two, when you dampen both sides, the paper will lay flat on your surface. If you just were to wet just the front of it and not tape it down, it would curl. So that is an advantage of taping both sides. Or dampening both sides. Okay, I need to make a note here. I'm using stronger pigment, and look how carefully I'm coming into this important edge. I'm testing it out. Some of this blue is still going to drift down into my cloud, and that's okay. But I'm starting to be able to get some more defined edges because the paper is set for a while. And you're watching this in real time. So this is really beautiful. We have a lot of softness, and then we have a little more defined area, and it's no coincidence that that defined cloud is landing right around this third. So remember rules of third. We divide the paper twice vertically, twice horizontally, evenly, and where those lines intercross at these thirds of the painting is where we want most of our interest to be. So even in painting skies, I'm thinking through those types of compositional ideas. So I have this little brush here. When you get a pool of water, it's tempting to just leave it because you think I'll just get a stronger mark, but you want to lift off those little pools. I had a little pool of water building up here and here. I took that little brush and I lifted it off because if you don't lift it off, it can bleed back up into this wash and create some things that you don't like. So don't leave just little pools sitting in your washes. Go ahead and lift them off. This brush is an Escoda Perla brush. And it's a pretty good size. I think it's like size 16. And I like this brush because it doesn't just soak up a ton of water. I can do a thicker mixture of paint with just a little bit of water, and I can go in and paint in this wash that's in a fragile state right now, and I'm less likely to create a cauliflower or a large bloom that I don't like. I have a lot of control with this brush. It's a synthetic brush, and it holds less water, and it's good specifically for this part of the painting. Notice I used my large mop brush earlier. Now I'm using a synthetic brush that holds less water. And I'm glancing at my reference photo to continue to get inspired, to get the feel of the scene right. But you'll notice that as I get into the painting, this painting is becoming its own thing. The reference photo is a reference. It's my inspiration for the scene. But once I'm down the road with this watercolor, I need to start picking up what's happening on the paper, paying attention to what's going on and the timing. And this is taking on a life of its own, and that's what I want it to do. I'm never going to create an exact copy of that. I'm using that scene, that photo, for inspiration to create this sky in this painting. So I'm taking my time, and that's another great thing about this method is I'm not in a big rush because the paper is damp. I'm not worried about getting hard edges, and I'm really taking my time and paying attention to what is going on the paper. Listening to the paper, not just what I think I want to have happen at this time. Really paying attention to how damp the paper is, when you should go in with more paint, and so on. And so things are starting to tighten up a little bit as things dry. And if I run out of things to say, I'm just going to play some nice, relaxing music, and you can watch this happen in real time. So right now, off camera, I'm likely mixing, and I'm coming back in with my big brush, and I knew that I would need some more shadows to really help these, or undersides of the clouds, to really give them form and get that strength of light. You know, that this cloud won't be as bright as I want it to be if I don't push the values. And when I say push the values, I mean use strong paint. And this looks really dark right here, but remember, as things dry, things fade. And we have already wet the paper down. We've already used a lot of water in this process. There's a lot of drying that's going to happen. So we want to be mindful of that. And I know this looks maybe a little dark, but you got to push those values. So you can see I mixed in a little bit of coolness for part of the shadow, and I'll be mixing in some more raw sienna. So part of the wash, again, this mixture of dark value is raw sienna, neutral tint, some lavender, and then if I want it to be cooler, I'm adding some cobalt blue. If I want it to be a little warmer, I'm adding in more raw sienna. And that's the mixture there. And look at these great soft edges. You know, the paper's still damp because I kept re-wetting it with all the pigment that I was using. And this is just great. The lost edges, the softness, you know, that's you can do that in other mediums, but it's not the same as painting wet into wet in watercolor. And it's a great part of this medium, and the more you get comfortable with the timing, the more that you will be able to work into your painting to get lost edges, to understand the timing that it takes to create different feelings and looks and atmospheres that you are interested in. I knew that I needed a little more strength over here. And that mark was nice to show us that this cloud is closer than these background clouds, all of these back here, that these clouds are closer. So by giving this the right amount of strength, I'm actually helping to create some depth in the work. It's pulling those closer clouds up to us, and it's letting the other ones sit further back. And I'm reaching the point, you can see I had to smudge a few little edges up here at the top of the painting. The edges of your painting dry the fastest. They're getting the most air, that's just how it is. I don't know how to describe it. But the edges of the paper, they dry quicker. And so when I go back up here to work on this area, you'll notice I softened the edge. I just smudged it a little bit with my finger because things are starting to tighten up. And to me, that says I need to be close to being done with working in the sky. And there are little markers along the way. As you get used to timing and paying attention, you know, as the paper starts to tighten up, you'll notice when you add a little mark, it's not getting as soft as it was, and things are starting to tighten. And that's when you need to be finishing up and knowing that it is what it is at this point. So as the paper starts to firm up and dry, it becomes less shiny. So as the paper dries, there's less water, it glistens less. And so that's another way that you can tell when the paper is starting to dry. It actually looks different, and not necessarily the pigment you've put on it, but the shininess. When the shininess goes away, you can tell that the paper is damp but not really wet. And so there are signs along the way that can help you understand what's going on your paper. Now what I'm doing here is I got this cloud in place, and I got the sky primarily done, but I want to lift off some little highlights around the scene, some little bits where the clouds are catching the light. So I'm going in and just tweaking things. I can still soften edges. If I have a hard edge like this one up here, I didn't want a really hard edge. I want the attention to really go right here. I came in with this little synthetic brush. Now this is a smaller version of the other brush I was using to add the darker pigment. It's an Escoda Perla size 12, and it's damp, but I'm using it to soften, to lift off little highlights, and I'm cleaning it and drying it. You can see I have a paper towel in my hand between times when I go and lift off other little highlights. I'm also using a paper towel here and to lift off a little highlight there. So things are drying. I'm not adding more paint right now, but I'm still able to manipulate the scene even when things aren't completely dry. So things are really starting to tighten up, but this is the time when I can really take a look and assess what I'm doing and go in and make changes. Stepping back during the process is important. We tend to hyper-focus on what we're trying to copy, so taking a step back from your palette continually, stepping away to see the bigger picture, that makes a big difference in your painting. Another thing we do that is helpful, squint, right? When you squint at the reference photo, you see less detail. Color information is less distracting, and you can see more of the values, and that makes a difference as well. And this is a fun part of the process. I'm overall happy with it at this point, and just doing little tweaks, softening, losing some edges, kind of playing around, seeing what I can get away with, seeing what is needed, all the while trying to proceed forward with caution, not wanting to overwork it, keeping things as fresh as I can. Okay, that is a look at the sky. You have seen me paint this sky in real time. And let me zoom ahead here to show you what the rest of the first wash looks like. So just for those that are curious, I finished up this first wash, I laid in those vibrant colors, and here's a look at the finished painting. I hope that you seeing me paint this sky in real time, that can help you get a better handle on watercolor timing. And it will make a big difference, not in just how you paint skies, but in how you approach the medium if you can really understand watercolor timing. So keep up all the great work, keep practicing and moving forward, and I'll see you next time. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.